Welcome everybody. I have done sheet metal work before. I've done patchwork before, cutting out some rotted areas, some rusted areas and welding in new. But most of my experience has been with smaller pieces. A lot of times they've been flat or maybe with just a little bit of a curve to it, but nothing like what I'm about to attempt. So thanks for joining me on this one. Wish me luck and let's get started. So now that I got the fender all clean, we're going to begin the 100-step process of replacing the metal on the end of this fender here. I have some paper here that I've cut to size to how I want it. Basically, everything underneath the paper is what we're going to remove and replace. You can see all this metal in here is all good. So we're going to keep as much of the good stuff as we possibly can. But unfortunately, we have to remove a lot of this one. So this is step number one. I'm just trying to get a template created so we can transfer this to our new metal and cut this out and start working with the metal. Plan A will be to replace this whole section with one piece of metal. I honestly don't know if I'm going to be able to do that or not. There's a lot going on here. We've got a bend there. We've got a lip on the other side. Of course, we've got a big curve here and a lip on the bottom side, and it's going to be tricky. If I can't pull this off with one piece of metal, I might take this section here and run it all the way out to the end and then split it right here and have this be the second piece, or maybe even split it again like right here and have that be the third piece. But like I said, plan A, we're going to attempt to do this with one piece of metal. I just don't know if I have the skills to pull it off, but we're going to give it our best shot. So what I'm going to try to do here on the paper is make notations of where all the curves are. I'm going to try to go as far as I can out on the fender where it's still flat. We're going to make a line there. And then we're going to come down on the radius till it's pretty much flat again. So we're going to, outline this big curve here. And it doesn't have to be perfect on the paper right now. I just need to get a ballpark feel for what we're trying to accomplish. These are all refrigerator magnets. I ordered a pack on Amazon. I don't know how many came in a pack, but there was a lot of them, and they work perfectly for this. So this is going to tell us where our biggest curve is on this piece. And then I'm also going to make a mark at the edge of where the lip should be. It's a little bit harder to do because we're trying to draw a line right on the very edge. This edge is not critical. This flange could be, a hair longer or a hair shorter if it ends up that way, because it doesn't really matter. Really don't need to fill this one in per se, but might as well do it anyway. I got a fatter tipped marker here. I think this is going to work much better. This bend right here is a little bit different from the flange on the back. It's also different from this one right here. So let's outline the edge of it first of all. And then we're also going to draw in the width of it, which is about right there. And then when we get this template off and laid flat, hopefully this will make sense and we can make accurate marks on the steel before we cut it. I also want to mark where the end is, this leading edge. There's not a flange on that right there, just on the bottom and on the top. Now another thing I want to do is take a radius gauge here. We're going to measure the radius of this curve to the best of our ability. Not this way yet, but this way, just to see if we can replicate it on metal. So from about there to there is about 4. And then it shallows after that. So this, from there to there, is about 24. And then this next section is about 36. And then the next section and the rest is 0. There's no bend right there. You know, when I make the piece, we're going to, of course, fit it up to the fender first, just to make sure it's right. But this way, at least we'll have something to go by. In addition to that, we can actually use this gauge and see how close we are. I'm looking over this template. I'm trying to think if we need to make any more notations before we remove it. I think we've got them all. And we've, of course, got it marked on the fender itself where the template fits. Let me go over this again with a better pen. Last time I was using that small one. Now, it doesn't matter how thick my line is here, because we're going to take the inside of this line. Well, I'm a little reluctant to remove this template, just because we got so much work on the template itself. But we got to remove it at some point, so might as well go for it. All right, here we go. And there you can see, again, what we're trying to replace. You know, we cleaned the metal on the rest of the fender, but I left the end out here just untreated, so you can see it's rusting again. So, I'm going to try to get this thing as flat as possible. Only for the sake of being able to trace around it. So if you look at this black stripe right here, this is our bottom lip. That's the front side on the very bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to cut the metal exactly along that line, because we're going to have to manipulate this piece of metal, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to behave when we start bending it. So I'd hate to go through a bunch of work and then not have enough metal on it. So now I think I need to cut along this bottom flange edge on the template. And then if we put this back on the metal, then I can make a more accurate line to find its edge right here. So let's put this, let's get the magnets back on it. So I got the piece cut out, rough cut out, and I've got the inside of the template saved. We can use the template as a guide as we're forming this metal, and we also have our radius notations marked on this right here. So we can set the template aside. In order to make this fit correctly on the flat part of the fender, we have to create a curve here. But before we create this curve, we have to put the upper flange in first and then bend it. So we're going to use the box brake to make this bend. But if we stick it in this way and we bend it up, it's going to bend the flange the wrong way. So unfortunately, I have to make this notation again on the back side. So that template will help for that again. So let me get that done. I'll make some better lines on it and then I'll bring you right back. All right, I've got the lines drawn. We're going to bend at this inside line first to create the flange. We'll worry about the excess stuff later on. And you might not think so, but this is actually a critical bend. If we screw this up, then we have to start all over with a new piece of metal, because nothing else is going to fit right if this bend isn't right. All right, here we go. The line of my bend, I think, is good, but we need to bend it more. We need to bend it at a 90-degree angle, and this was only like 45 or so. So we're going to try to get it back where it was before. Let's try this. Still not quite 90. Let me go check the fender. All right, here's our first fit up after the bend. Pretty happy with that, actually. I think we got it right on the line, and we got a good, pretty much 90-degree, and we can work with that. So now that we've got this upper flange bent correctly, now we need to get this bend in this piece right here so we can lay this flat on the metal. To be honest, I'm not sure where to start this bend. We're going to have to kind of do it a little bit at a time, see if we can sneak up on it, because you can see how high off the fender it is. This needs to be bent pretty severely. I don't know, I'm going to guess right around in here somewhere. So for this trick, we're going to try to use the stretcher, and rather than try to physically bend the flat part, we're going to try to stretch the flange right in here or somewhere in there. And by stretching this right there, it should put a curve like this in the flat part. I press down with my foot to apply pressure to the piece. We'll do it a few times to see if we can start seeing any curve there. And this is another reason I left a big flange here, because I knew I was going to have to do this. Can you guys see that? We've got just a little bit of a curve starting. This time I'm going to go closer out to the end because it really curves there close to the end. So I'll stretch, so I'll put some work in right there. Hopefully we'll see that start to curve up. And you have to be careful with these stretchers, because what they do is the jaws clamp down and then they spread out. Kind of like those old origami things from elementary school. They clamp down and then spread out, and that's how it stretches it. So it's physically distorting the metal, and if you really lay into it, you could break the metal, you could crack it, you could split it. Now I think 18 gauge stuff is going to be better than anything thinner, but you could still split 18 gauge if you try it hard enough. You guys start to see that little bit of a curve. So this is going to take me a while. This is going to probably take me 20 or 30 minutes to get this bent and stretched properly. So I'm going to work on this off camera and I'll bring you back when I'm done. All right, I've been working on this for about 20 minutes and here's what we got so far. This curve is really turning out nicely. I mean, it almost looks like I know what I'm doing, but this is the first time I've ever done this. So it's just a little bit high right in there. And then I think it'll fit it perfectly in that curve there. And then we can move on with the rest of the piece. This would be fantastic if we could actually pull this off in one piece of metal. But it's getting a little bit late in the day and I'm really close to having this curve finished. But I found that this is the time of the day when I make the most mistakes. So I think the smart thing is going to be just let this sit overnight. Let me think about it overnight and come out in the morning with a fresh head, finish this curve, and then we can move on to the next part. But so far so good. Good morning, everybody. It's the next day now. About 37 degrees out this morning. Coldest it's been this year so far. And it's only going to get colder. But I've got a fresh head and we can get back to shaping this curve on our new piece right there. So I thought I'd use the radius gauge on this too, instead of just using the eyeballs. At least start with the gauge and go from there. So I want to show you something here. First, I'm going to put the gauge up against the metal on a radius that is not correct. I want to show you, if I shine a flashlight behind, you can see that light shining through in the middle, right? Well, if we move it over to number 3, which I think is very close to the actual radius, I put the light behind the gauge now, and there's no light at all coming through. So that's pretty dang close to being the right radius. And then if I come over here to the piece, we put number 3 against it, and you can see we still got quite a bit of light shining through that. So even though we're getting close, it still needs to be bent more. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll bring you back in a minute. All right, I've got it pretty darn close at this point. It's got a nice tight fit along this part. Nice and tight up top. The only thing weird we got, see the corner right there? I think from stretching this so much, it caused the very tip of that corner there to bunch up just a little bit. So I'm not sure if we can just maybe knock that down with a hammer, or if we need to shrink like right around that area. All right, I got it better. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And as I was working on it, I was realizing this is more like finished type work, and we're not even close to being to that stage yet. So kind of getting ahead of myself there to make things perfect. So we're going to stop what we're doing there. Take this as a win because I'm very happy with the fit. And we're going to move on to the next part. I guess before we move on to the next part, I want to show you this edge here. So the bottom of the hashed line right there, that's going to be the bottom flange of the fender. I'm going to try to make it the same width as the existing part of the fender there, and we're going to blend it in. So below that black line, all this material here is excess. And that worked really well for stretching it because we had a lot of material here to stick between the jaws. If we only had that much material to stick between the jaws, it would have been more difficult, it would have taken longer, and it would have been more prone to cracking. We could cut it off now and get it even with the lip here, but I don't want to do that before we weld it to the fender because things could move just a hair one way or the other, and don't want to get ahead of ourselves there. This is going to be a compound bend. This is going to be the larger radius bend, and then this bottom one is going to be the flange on this side. And then below here, this is all excess that will eventually trim off. So I'm really happy with how the piece is shaping out so far. But I have to be extremely careful with this because at any stage, if I make any kind of a major mistake, we have to start this whole thing over again. So the only way to do this is I think we're going to have to make this larger bend first, and that's going to match this curve here on the edge of the fender. Then when that's bent and straight down, then we can worry about the flange later. But this one is going to be critical. And to be honest, this is the one I'm most worried about. Now this radius here does not fit perfectly in one of the notches on our tool here. It's kind of halfway between 0.75 and 1. So that's what we're gonna have to go by. And I have this piece of pipe from my scrap metal bin. If you guys watched the video on the Ford 960 when I made that tie rod from scratch, this is the stuff that I use, and this is what was left over basically. And I think this is going to be a perfect match for the radius on this fender. So now we got to figure out how to do that. All right, so here's what I did with this pipe. First of all, I tapered the ends so there wouldn't be a sharp end there, because if we're trying to bend something over a sharp edge, that's going to transfer to the metal. So I rounded off both sides so nice and smooth. And then I welded a couple of pieces of scrap metal to the center of it, and we're going to stick this in the vise and then try to bend the fender over this. And if that doesn't work, what I'm going to do is adapt this to the box brake. So I'll remove 2 or 3 fingers, whatever it takes to fit, and then I will bolt this to the box brake, and then we'll just use the brake to bend the metal around it. First, we're going to put this in the vise and see how hard it is to bend the fender around it in the vise. Yeah, I think that's going to work to a certain degree. You might be able to get the initial bent going and then finish it off with a hammer. But I'm going to be going back and forth a lot to make sure that we get the bend started at the right place, because if it's too high or too low, then we're... See, I think I've got it started in the right place, so my line was really good on the metal here. It needs to start bending at this upper line and continue to bend, and then we have to put a curve in it also. All right, this excess metal is actually hurting me at the moment because it's making it difficult to get it bent as much as I need to. But we got the right idea started. I guess I'll have to finish this up with a hammer, and then we'll see where we're at after that. All right, you can see we're kind of getting there slowly. But because of the compound bend here, we got one going this way and then one going this way, I'm having a hard time getting it to fold over as much as I want it to. So I tried a little bit of heat there, and that actually helped. So I'm going to do it again, just a little bit higher up, just to see if I can get that first bend going a little bit more aggressively. I think we need to take this back out to the vise, and right in here where there's no radius yet to this line, we need to really see if we can get this laid over, and then we can work with the rest of it. All right, you can see I'm finally starting to make the proper curve and then straight. We'll worry about the bottom curve later. But yeah, this is tough. If I can't continue this curve around as aggressively as I want to, I might end up having to cut slits in this. I've almost got it correct to this first mark right here where there's no radius to it, still it's just straight. And then it starts to bend right there at that mark, and that's gonna be increasingly difficult. I just wanted to give you a progress update here. Very happy with this first bend that we made. It looks fantastic. Very happy with this curve that we stretched and made this nice sweeping curve. All this fits very nicely. So this is what I've got on this side now. I've got a pretty good radius going right here from about there to about there. And then from here on, it's not shaped properly yet. I've been working on this quite a while, and I've come to the realization that I think I just have too much metal out here. There's too much metal here to properly fold under and then create that flange and curve this way at the same time. I just can't make that happen. If I try to force it, I'm gonna get a crease somewhere, probably up here. And we don't want creases. Creases are bad. Anyway, I do think I have a plan to fix it. I just wanted to show you how the piece is looking so far. Let me go get this clamp to the fender and I'll show you how it looks on the fender, and we'll go from there. All right, I got a clamp down there so we can get a good look at it. So we still have a good fit with our curve right there, and of course our edge fits perfect along there. And we're 90% done with this curve right here on the far end here. You can see it's very close, and I could probably even make that work welding, you know, spot by spot and coming around and pushing it down as I go. That's probably close enough. Sorry for the interruption. If you stick around to the very end of the video, I have a surprise about this Willys truck that I want to share with you. And also don't forget 20% off in the store. Good morning, everybody. It's another beautiful day, October 21st, 2025, and we had our first freeze last night. It's about 32 degrees. Anyway, I had a thought overnight. It's like, before we start cutting on our piece that we've been working so hard on, let me put a piece of paper on here, see how the paper behaves as I try to make it fit our curve. And I think that'll give me a better idea of what to do next with the metal. You can see if I try to push it down and roll it over, we've got too much paper in here to accomplish that, which is exactly what I thought yesterday with the metal. We've just got too much metal in here. Just bear with me here while I figure this out. I'm going to try to cut a couple of slits in here and see what happens. Right around where the bunched up areas are. So grab this one now and fold it under, and we can get it to lay the way we want it to now. So yeah, same thing here. Now we can get it to lay down flat the way we want. So put the original template on top there with a couple of magnets, and we're going to use our original lines in between the different radiuses. So right here is 0, and then from here to here is 36, and then from there to about there is 24, and then a tight one up here I believe was 4. So I think I'm going to cut 3 slits right on the lines in between the changes, and I'm not sure how far up we're going to need to cut it, but it's going to have to be pretty far. Maybe right up to the bottom of where the curve stops is a good place to try. Okay, here's the next progress update. You can see I've got a slit cut there, there, and there. That one I had to go pretty high on, but they're fairly tight together, so I should be able to weld those up easily. And I'm beginning to shape the, you can see I wrote flat right there. That's just a notation to me that this side of the piece is basically flat, and then underneath it turns into that flange. So I'm trying to get this flat, and I've been working on these first 3 sections, 0, 36, and 24. This one is going to be the hardest out of all of them, so I haven't started on that one yet. But these are coming along pretty well. I'm already really close to the target radius on both of them, but that will be finish work once we get it welded up. That's what we'll do at the end. Now that we're getting close in here, the other element is the fact that I've been putting this piece over the top of the fender. So, for example, this edge, when we cut the piece out of the fender, this edge is going to be over, you know, a couple of millimeters or something. So it's going to push this whole thing this way, which means that this will have to be bent down a little bit more than it even is. But I still think I'm safe to weld up this first seam and start working the metal in here, And then at some point, we're finally gonna have to cut the fender off so we can start really fitting this thing up to it, not just over the top of it. So let's go get this first seam welded up and we'll go from there. All right, here's what we got at the end of another day. I've got the first 2 seams welded up and curved over pretty nicely. I've got a rough cut to this bottom flange, so it's not perfectly even yet, but it's close. I'll try to hold the piece like this. You can see that flange is starting to come around, looking pretty good. Both welds turned out very nice, but this one ended up kind of flat for some reason, so there's a bit of a low spot there, so we'll have to deal with that. This one is pretty good, and if you can see on the back there, we got excellent penetration, so those welds aren't going anywhere. Let me go put it on the fender and show you what it looks like there. Looking pretty good. We get a better look at the flange here. So I still got some excess to cut off. Not as much excess up here. This is pretty much the length it's gonna be up here, but a little wide down there yet. I've got a pretty nice fit all the way up to the end of the 3rd section. Now let's take a look at this 4th section now. We really have to do something fancy with this because you can see that huge gap. It's got to come way this way and down at the same time. So that's going to be a little tricky, but honestly, every single part of this has been tricky so far. So, you know, what else is new? Once I get that finished, then it's time to cut the old metal out and start zapping this new stuff in. And we're going to have a brand new piece of fender here. Much better than this, huh? Look how nasty that is. And then put our new piece on. So far so good. I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right guys, so this is after another couple days have gone by. I haven't had a lot of time to get out to the shop and work on stuff, so I've been getting out here like an hour at a time, so I haven't bothered setting up the camera because that really slows me down. So all those slits that we cut are all welded up and it's all one piece again. You can see it's not perfect yet. We still got to trim off some of the flange there, and then of course a lot on this side. But let me go show you how it fits on the fender. You can see I've got the very tip pretty nice. It's, you know, straight up and down. You can't go by this because that's the old fender and it is twisted. So mine is much better than the old fender was. Let me show you what we got going on with the radiuses here. All right, the first one is 36, which is right about there. And you can see that's pretty darn close. There's not much daylight between the gauge and the fender. By the way, this part here is 0, so that's good too. Anyway, 36 is there. Now the next one is way off, and you can see just by looking at it. Got a high spot there and a low spot there. So what is supposed to be 24 is, you know, we can see a lot of daylight in there. And then the last curve out to the tip is 4. And I've pretty much got the proper radius, but this is too high right in here. So I got to hammer this down a little bit. And if I flatten that out, I think the gauge is going to lay right up against the fender. And we're not going to have to do too much more work to it. But right in here is where I need to work on it. Still, we need to get on the backside and hammer it out a little bit and try to put the proper curve back into it. Except for cutting the slits in it and taking some metal out in there, I pretty much met my goal of making this thing out of one piece of metal. I didn't have to break it into 2 or 3 pieces. I was able to stick with the same piece of metal, which is really amazing to me, especially since I'm such a rookie at this. So I'm gonna do a bunch of finish work off camera, get the curves at least closer to where they need to be. I'm gonna finish this with a skim coat of filler, but I wanna get this like 98% right just with the metal before we even think about putting primer or filler on it or anything. So at this point, we're getting very close to finally cutting this bad metal out and welding the new piece in. There's just a couple things I want to check beforehand, and that's something that we haven't talked about yet. When we cut this piece out and put the new one in, for one thing, we want to make sure we get the overall length right. I don't want it to be a 1/2 inch short or a 1/2 inch long, even though it's not a critical thing because this is going to be, you know, kind of underneath the cab right in here. But I want to try to get that as close as I possibly can. So we want to make sure the length is the same. We also want to make sure that once we weld it in, the end here isn't like cocked up or down or twisted. And finally, I need to make some notations about these holes. There's 1, 2, 3 mounting holes, and there's one missing right here. So unfortunately, I don't know where this one is supposed to be. I'm just going to leave that metal blank for the time being, and when we get further down the road and get this mocked up to the cab, when we're about ready to finish everything, then I can drill the hole in it then. But the 3 holes that are still here, I want to make sure I get those transferred over to the new metal correctly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tie a piece of string to an arbitrary point on the fender. So rather than using a tape measure, I'm just going to use the string as kind of a go, no-go gauge as far as where things are. So the first thing I want to note is the very top of the tip, right where it starts to curve. I'm just going to make this notation with some blue permanent ink on the string, so it's always going to be there, and I'm going to leave it fastened to that anchor until we're done with this project. So I know right where the tip is. So as far as keeping the fender straight when we weld the new part on, like I said before, we don't want the tip high or low or twisted. I'm going to measure from the string down to each one of these mounting holes and just make note of the distance. And when we put the new piece on, we'll put the string back up to the tip and try to make it the same. So from the center of the hole up to the string to the surface of the fender, we're looking at 2 7/8. 2 7/8. 2 1/16. 2 1/16. And the only dimension that I haven't notated here is the side to side right here. And I think if we get everything else correct, the length and the angle and everything else, I think it's going to sit flat this way too. So I'll wrap up another day. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I think we're going to go ahead and cut this fender out finally. All right, after a couple more days, here's what I've got. I've been working with the metal along the edge here, along the side, and I've improved the curve. I think you can probably see that. And as far as, you know, continuing with shaping the actual metal with the hammer and dolly and whatever, I've kind of hit the point of diminishing returns on this. I can only do so much with this, and I think it's time to call it good enough. So what I'm saying is now it's finally time to cut off the fender and weld this one on. So I still have to trust my original lines here, the inside of the black lines. However, because it would be a fatal mistake to end up with this thing too short for some reason, like we measured wrong or something of that nature, if it ends up too short, we're in trouble. So you can see the red line there. So I'm going to use the black line here, but on the horizontal lines, the ones that affect the length, I'm giving myself just a little bit of room for error here. So I'm going to cut it just a hair longer than the template said to, you know, just in case. And then if we have to trim it down a little bit, that's okay. We can sneak up on it and get it fit right exactly where it needs to be. But if it ends up being too short, that would be a problem. All right, I've got the new piece fit up to the fender there. It's just kind of dangling there. I've got one clamp on it. And I can see by my blue mark we're just a little bit long, which is exactly what I wanted. So now I just have to trim it here and here to make it push back a little bit, and at the same time make sure the edges line up as well. So I'm going to do all that off camera because that's going to take me a while, and then when I'm done with that, I'll bring you guys back when we're ready to weld it in. All right, about an hour later, here's our first mock-up. It is starting to look like a fender again. I haven't got the edges prepared for the weld yet, but let me show you the gaps I have. Can you see that one first? Nice and tight. And then nice and tight all the way down. You can see in between the magnets. I don't know if you can or not. This on the corners is going to be a little bit of manipulating the metal as I weld. So there's a bit of a low spot there on this side, but it's not going to be there when I finish welding it. And take a look at this. It is the exact perfect length. I am so glad that I left myself a little bit of extra to play with, because I did have to trim it a little bit here and there, and I was able to kind of sneak up on it and get it just about right. And if you're wondering about the mounting holes that we still need to drill, I'm going to use the actual piece of this old fender to trace the holes on this and get them cut out. So we're going to hold on to this for just a few more minutes, because I'm not going to do that until I get it all welded, or at least welded in place. All right, I'm ready for the first two spot welds. I've chosen this area here and this area here, not just for a balance of structure, but also because the pieces fit nicely right up against each other. There's no gaps, and they're both level with each other. So those would be good places to start. After that, we can remove the magnets and the clamp, and then we can start adding spot welds one at a time. And as we do it, we'll make sure that the pieces are fitting up nicely with each other, and that, like, one's not higher or lower than the other. And also, for you beginners out there, can you see the bead on the tip of the MIG wire right there? Ideally, you want to cut that off before you make another weld, because that bead can hold oxidation, and you don't want to add oxidation to your piece, you know, inadvertently. That's what we're trying to avoid. So it's a bit of a hassle, but I always cut off that bead when I'm working on something important before I make the next weld. Now I'm going to add a tack right there. I prepared the surfaces and made sure it's level right there. And then after that, then we can finally remove this clamp and just work with the piece as we go around. So see if I can get the gun up inside here. Now we can remove the clamp. That's what we're talking about. So now what I'm going to do off camera is prepare the whole seam. So it's nice and shiny on both sides, and then we'll systematically start tacking the rest of this in. So I've got a few more tacks added, as you can see. I've just got a couple issues here that I want to show you. I was going along fine, and then this one here I had a blowout on. Not sure why. You can see how nicely the two pieces butt up next to each other. Maybe I just held it on there for half second too long or something. But I wanted to show you that because I also want to show you how to fix it. But before we do that, I want to go back over here a little bit. You can see you've got just a wonderful fit between the two metals up here. I've got 3 nice welds in there, but we're a little bit high in here still. I didn't see this coming. I'm not sure why it's high like that. It's not a big deal. It just requires some more work, you know, like everything else. So I'm gonna have to use the hammer and dolly, I think. Essentially, I need to stretch this edge some more so the metal spreads out a little bit. And then we can get that fit up nice and tightly. Need to do a little work there, a little work there. It's pretty good right in the corner. Let's get this fixed and then we'll get that fixed. So at this point, I've ground the weld flat on both the top and the bottom and prepared the surfaces for a fresh weld. I've got a chunk of old copper here that I harvested from an old mallet. I cut it long ways across the head, and I'm going to put it on the underside. We're going to clamp it in place, and the copper will act as a heat sink. So when I start my weld, I'm not going to aim for the actual surrounding metal anywhere. I'm going to aim for the center of the hole, which will effectively be on the chunk of copper. And of course, copper is conductive, so it will still allow the arc to occur, but the idea is it's going to take up most of the heat from the weld. So after I hit the copper with the MIG wire, I'll make a tight circle to fill in the rest of the hole. The weld will not stick to the copper, so I can let this fall off. And then if all is well, we can grind it down and move on. So I've got it clamped in place from the bottom. If you look through the hole, you can see the copper right in there. It's as close to the bottom of the hole as I can get it. And we're gonna go for it here. Pretty much like that. Looks like it worked. You can see I've got a tiny hole right there on the top of the weld, but the rest of it filled in very nicely. So now I'm just gonna make a quick weld to fill in that little hole, and we should be done with this repair. Yeah, that looks great. So that's probably the best way for me to fill in blowouts on sheet metal. That's the way I'm going to be the most successful at it. You can also do this without having a heat sink. You can make systematic welds along the edges of the curve of the hole until you eventually fill the whole thing in. In my opinion, that's not the best way to do it with thinner gauge sheet metal. You can do it, but you kind of end up with a blob on top. Then what I would do is flip it over, and then you end up with kind of a blob on the bottom and a blob on top, and then you grind those down and smooth them out, and then you'd be done at that point. And believe me, I've done that a few times. It does work, but it's more work and it's more risky. Anyway, I think what I'll do with these two chunks of copper is make different shapes out of them. Like, for lack of a better term, I'll make spoons out of them. Make like one with a curved head that would fit underneath a curved panel, and one that's flat, and one, you know, just different shapes and sizes. Just we have this in our bag of tricks for the future. So now I'm going to work on this curve. I'm going to get it nice and flat and butt it up with the metal just like the rest of it is. And then after that, then we can zap the rest of this thing in. A couple hours later, and I've got my first round of welds complete. All the way to the edges, all the way underneath. And I've got it fit so tightly that there isn't even a gap right in there. All that due diligence and preparation and planning and measuring paid off for me, because when it came time to weld the whole thing in like this, it went very smoothly. There wasn't a lot of manipulation. There wasn't a lot of fixing and correcting things. Pretty much just had to fix that bend right there, and that was it. And look at this curve. It's just, I know the welds are still there, but it looks really good. And our edges here, how they meet, I mean, I haven't even done any finish work on this, and it is very, very nice. So we still have a few things left to do here. I'm not going to make you guys watch me do all this because the video is getting a little bit long here, but I'm going to trim off this flange so it's the same size as this, all the way to the tip. Of course, I need to finish welding it in, and then we need to grind it down. But the first thing I'm going to do is put our mounting holes into it. So let's get that done. Because I don't need this piece anymore, I'm going to slice it off right here all the way to the tip. I'm just going to lay it on top of our new fender and outline the holes. that, I got the template transferred, holes drilled, and finished. Turned out pretty nice. So again, on our old fender right in here, it was completely rotted out. There was actually no metal right there, right? So I don't know where that fourth hole is supposed to be. And if you think it might be equidistant between this hole and this hole, yeah, you might be right, but I've been working on cars long enough to know that I'm not going to make that assumption. I mean, it could be there, it could be there. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but I'm certainly not going to guess at that. We'll just wait until we mock everything up later. So before I finish for the day, I'm going to get the flanges trimmed to meet the old metal on both sides, and we'll go from there. All right, so here's where we are now after the second and final welds along the seams. I've got them mostly ground down to meet the base metal. I got really good penetration along the entire length of the seam. In addition to that, I flipped the fender over and went along the seam and did some more welding on the bottom, so I can be confident that we have a really strong seam. Just like a couple of videos ago when I took that scrap material and hit it on an anvil with a sledgehammer and bent it, and I could not get those welds to break. And that's the same kind of quality that I've ended up with here. Now, if you look right in here, it's pretty obvious you can still see the seam. Well, the reason for that is because it's a little bit high right there. That's just the nature of the beast, I guess. That's how it turned out. So what I don't want to do is take the grinder and just eat away at this until it's perfectly flat, because we're just thinning the metal right in here, and we don't want to do that. So we have to flatten this metal another way. I mean, it's not terrible, but there is a definite ridge there that I think we can improve upon. Now, with my limited experience with the hammer and dolly work, I have learned that it's pretty easy to manipulate metal anywhere besides the weld seam. The weld seams are very dense, they're very hard, and they don't move like the rest of the sheet metal does. If you take a hammer and dolly to it, it's very difficult to manipulate it. So what I'm going to do is take my oxyacetylene torch, and I'm going to heat this entire seam right through here. I'm going to heat it up till it's like a dull red color. And then I'm going to use a flat body hammer to hammer it down, and a dolly on the bottom side using the off dolly technique. And I'll explain that later. Now, you might think that by doing that, it's going to make this weld brittle and hard, but it's not, because we're only heating it up to a certain temperature till it's a dull red. If you were to really lay into this thing with a torch and get it like bright, smoking orange, and then manipulated it, then yes, the metal would end up being brittle and it would be more prone to cracking. But if you only heat it up to a certain temperature, then it actually has the opposite effect. It has an annealing effect, and the welds end up a little bit more pliable. And it's interesting how that works. So you can see I've got my area here where I want to knock down and flatten. And if that works, I'm going to do it again right here. I'm going to use the bigger hammer with a nearly flat face, and I'm going to use this dolly on the bottom. Make sure the face of your hammer is clean, because if there's any debris on that at all, specks of dirt or something like that, and you start hammering in, well, you're going to make little holes in your metal. So you don't want to do that. Make sure it's clean. cow. That was amazing. Okay, I'm officially amazed at how well that worked. Now you might have noticed that the metal didn't even get to a dull red color. Because I saw the heat trying to expand so much, I cut off the flame right there. I didn't want to heat up the whole piece, right? I just wanted to heat up what we're doing. And that ended up being hot enough. I cannot believe how well that worked. So I'm gonna do it right here again. There's just a little bit of a high spot right there. We'll knock this down. And then we're finally going to move on to the filler and primer. You can see that one did get a little bit dark red. I don't know if because it was a smaller area or what, but anyway, I got this one knocked down too. The only issue with this one is now it's a little bit low on either side of the weld. I got the weld flat with the fender, but now it's a little bit low on either side. It's probably not worth the effort to try to get those spots to pop up, but you know me, I'm gonna try it anyway. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll just put a little filler in there. But the main thing is I got the weld even with the fender. Now, as far as the hammer and dolly technique goes, you might think that you would hold the dolly directly against the bottom of the fender and then tap on the top of it like this. But that is not correct for what I'm trying to accomplish here. If you pinch the metal between the hammer and the dolly and it makes like a ting, that is the sound of this metal stretching. If you got it like almost perfect, but you just need to flatten it out a little bit more or planish it, that's a fancy word, then you do hold the dolly right up against the metal, but then it's just light taps all the way around to do the really fine finish work and get it really nice and smooth. But for an off dolly technique, what I'm doing is I'm holding the dolly just a little bit below the surface of the fender on the bottom, okay? So it's not against the metal. The dolly is just there to prevent the metal from going too far down, basically. Now, when you're trying to bring up a low spot, you do put the dolly right up against the metal. You're holding the dolly against the low spot and kind of pressing up with your hand while you hit around it with the hammer on top. And that would be an on dolly technique because it's physically against the bottom of the piece that you're working with. So I'm going to try that just because we're here. I got the tools in my hand. I'm going to try to bring up those low spots a little bit. So I'm going to find a dolly that fits as perfectly as possible against the bottom of the fender. I'm going to hold it there and press up while I hit around it on top. I'm just amazed by how this works. I've been watching a guy on YouTube. His channel is called Make It Custom. He's really good with bodywork and manipulating metal, and he's a pretty good teacher too. So if you're interested in that, go check out Make It Custom. That's how I've been kind of learning how to do this. This one here, I got it to come up partially. Still needs a little bit more work. You can clearly see the low spots, right? The darker areas. And conversely, you can see over here, we've just got a few more high spots to take care of. The ones in the center that are still shiny silver, that one, right there, so on and so forth. So when we get those, even with the base material, then all these dark areas around them are going to go away. Because then when I put the DA on it, it's going to make contact with the whole fender, right? If it's flat on there, it's going to show your highs and lows. I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on this because we're reaching the point of diminishing returns on this now, but I am going to work on this a little bit more, and then we'll move on with the filler. All right, we are really getting close now. I got a lot of those low spots to come up over here. You can see there's just a couple of dark spots left, and I improved upon this one as well. We still have some very minor lows in there, but that is good enough. The corner looks fantastic here. The edge. So it's finally time to move on. I'm going to put some POR 15 metal prep on this. It's basically phosphoric acid with a rust converter. So this will remove any micro rust. It will also etch the metal, so it will take a primer well. And it will also leave a protective zinc coating on the metal when we're done. So the part that we're treating here will no longer be susceptible to the atmosphere. But we're going to let that cook for about 20 minutes. Come back, clean it off with water, and then we'll put some epoxy primer on it. All right, 20 minutes later, we're going to rinse it off with water. Remember, there's a zinc coating on it now, so water isn't going to hurt anything. We want to get all that acid off of it. It sure leaves a nice clean finish. While I'm waiting for the primer to dry, I just wanted to show you the tools I'm using for grinding. This is a small 90-degree pneumatic gun. I love this thing. It fits my hand perfectly. And this is a 3M 36 grit pad, so super coarse. It's really nice for removing welds because it does it in a hurry. The only issue with this, or any grinder that you use on sheet metal work, you have to be careful not to dig into the metal around the weld. You just want to grind the weld off only. So you got to kind of put it on its edge or find some way where you're just touching the weld. But this is an awesome one. And then I also have a straight one with a smaller diameter disc on it, and I've got all different kinds of grits for this, starting at 36 and going up to 240. But I usually use 36 or 60 or 80 because I use this to grind the welds down also. So you're not looking for a super smooth finish at this point. And then the dual action sander here, I've got an 80 grit pad on, and this is perfect for finishing the surface when you're done grinding down the welds, you're done prepping the metal. Hit it with 80 grit before the epoxy primer, and then the primer really has a good surface to bite into. Not looking too bad. There's some ripples in there. Nothing serious. We're gonna let this sit overnight, let it get good and dry. Now, if you missed the last video, we are going to put undercoating on all the, the bottom sides of the fenders and the body and everything else. So that's why I intentionally left some of the welds on the bottom. I didn't grind them all the way down flat. I did grind them down, maybe 3/4 of the way or halfway or something like that. But I left a good bit of the welds just to add strength to the whole thing. Good morning, everybody. It's November 13th now, 2025, and it's finally time for the big reveal. Finally time to be done with this repair that we've been working on. I'm very happy with the way this turned out. I learned a lot in the process, especially coming from the beginning of the video when I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to do this at all. And being overly picky with my own work here, let's get down more level with the fender. I don't know if you can see that, but right there's a little bit of a high spot. It's about the size of a nickel. And over here, you probably can't see it, but right there is a bit of a low spot, but very minimal, well within the range of acceptability. So now we're going to bring back the radius gauge. Remember this? Well, it was 4 right out here by the end, right? See if I can get you a good look at that. Maybe just a sliver of daylight in between the fender and the radius gauge. It's dang near perfect. Let's move on to the next one. And it's pretty much the same. There's just a sliver of daylight showing in between the fender and the gauge, but that looks very good. Next is 36. I hope you can see that there's virtually no daylight showing through that one at 36. So even though I was a little bit off, remember we were a little bit low here and a little bit high here, I was able to mostly pound that out with a hammer, and then just a little bit of body filler did the trick. So I hope you can see we ended up with a pretty nice curve. Now we're going to check the string gauge, and we've already checked it for length. We know we nailed the length of it. So now I just want to see how close we got our dimensions in here. If you remember from before, this one was about 2 7/8 distance between the string and the top of the fender. This one was about 2 1/16. So right now it's about 2 15/16. And this one was 2 1/16, and now it's about 2 1/8. So on this one we're somewhere between a 1/16 and a 32nd off here, and on this one we're off by about a 1/16. And do you know what we call a 1/16 and a 32nd of an inch here in Idaho? Good enough. As far as me continuing the work on this and trying to get it 100% perfect and ready for paint, that's not what we're doing here. I have to remember that I'm just doing patchwork. We're just fixing rust and welding in new metal. We're not preparing the surfaces for paint. We're going to leave that for the pros because frankly I'm not very good at it. So we're going to let the professional paint guys work their magic on this and get it perfect and ready to go. Remember that surprise I promised you guys? We're going to get to that in just a second. But now the question is, what's next? Well, let me show you. So we already fixed this piece, right? And now we fixed that piece. Well, if we come over here, I've already got this section cut out. So let me try to hold this up to the light and see if you guys can see how many holes are in this thing. It is quite comical, actually. Some of the metal on this might be thick enough to weld, but a lot of it, especially up here in the top, is very thin, like almost paper thin. I already tried to plug weld a couple of these up here, and that was a failure. The metal's just too thin. Even with that trick using the copper as a heat sink, it just melted the metal right away. So yeah, I want to replace this whole piece. That's the right thing to do. Compared to what we did there, I think this should be relatively easy, except for the fact that this piece doesn't have a straight part on it, I don't think. We got all kinds of curves in it. So I've already got my template built for this. I just need to transfer it to metal and cut it out. And then it's going to take a while to shape it. And then I think welding it in will be the easy part. So this is the last major repair on this fender. I'll probably do that off camera because you guys know the process at this point. The other stuff on the fender that we need to fix, I don't know if you can see, there's a crack there and a crack there, and a poor looking repair that we need to grind off and fix. And then on the inside here, there's a few of these cracks along the inside lip. Even though you can't see any of this, we need to fix it because we don't want these cracks to advance any further. So what I'll probably do is drill a pilot hole at some point and then weld from the inside and back out. The only thing that concerns me here is the metal is a little bit thin, so I'm going to attempt to weld this metal first, and if that doesn't work, then I'm going to cut this lip off and then weld a new lip on, and that might be easier, honestly, but we'll see. So I'm going to do all that in between videos, and I'll show you the result when we're done with it in the next one. But for the next video, we're going to focus on the hood. I think, or I should say I hope, that this is going to be a slightly more pleasant experience, because I don't think this hood has any rot in it, even though we've got, you know, some rust coming up there, and generally the surface is in terrible condition, but the hood itself is pretty straight. There's no dents that I can see of. It all looks pretty darn good. Let's see if I can, you know, even up underneath, it ain't exactly pretty, but I don't see any rot in this. I don't see any major dents. I don't see any major rust. So I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. I don't think I'm gonna have to make any major repairs on the hood, so that will be nice. And now for the surprise I promised you. About 3 weeks ago, when I was in deep fixing this fender, kind of right in the middle of it, I saw an ad pop up, 1955 I think it was, or early 50s Willys pickup truck, parting out. It was a complete truck in decent condition. Now when I first saw the ad, it kind of made me sick to my stomach, because I hate to see people parting out original vehicles that can still be saved. Well, the more information I got on this one in the ad, I learned that the frame had been modified, and it had a I think it was a small block Chevy in there, and this God knows what kind of transmission. In other words, the running gear was all messed up. The only real good stuff on it was the body. And it was also a local ad, only about an hour away from me. So I messaged the guy. I said, hey, I'm interested in probably the bed for sure. Maybe the right front fender. If it's good, then we don't have to do what we did with the left one. Maybe the rear fenders, maybe the wheels. I could use the wheels for my other Jeep or whatever. His ad had only been up for about 2 hours, and people were swarming him like buzzards on a carcass. By the time I had contacted him, only after a couple of hours of the ad being up, he had already sold some of the stuff. So I started pressing him. I say, what you got left? I'm interested. I'll come right now. I'll get the stuff. And long story short, the only thing still available to me was the bed. And you guys remember from a couple of videos ago, I showed you how bad the bed is on this truck. Well, I managed to score a replacement bed. I told the guy, don't go anywhere, don't sell the bed. I'm on my way. I'm in my truck right now. I'll see you in about an hour. And sure enough, he was waiting for me there at our meeting place with the bed. He'd already removed the bed from the other truck, which I thought I was going to have to do. So that was even better. So let me show you the good stuff on this. This is the front, by the way. The bed's flipped around in the truck right now. But look at the condition of these stake channels. They're even decent down inside there. I know you can't tell, but it just looks like there's surface rust inside the channels. It's not all rotted out. And look at the condition of the side of the bed. This is some good metal right in here. Again, stake channels, good, no dents. Come around here to the inside of the bed, you can see at the bottom down here, we do have some pretty bad rust and rot starting. So that's gonna have to be cut out. But the rest of the bed sides are very, very good. This front piece is also in very good condition. Doesn't look like it's bent, doesn't look like it's rotted out. I come over here, somebody has drilled out a couple holes for some reason in this channel, wasp nest in there. So we'll have to repair that. But besides that, these channels are in great condition. And again, the side of the bed. We've even got both factory tailgate tabs present in excellent condition. Remember, we had to fabricate that one on this truck. Well, these are still here and they're great. The cross supports for the bed you know, they got surface rust on them, but they're not bad. They're not rotted out. So once we get those dipped or blasted or whatever, those are going to come back around and be fine. I'm just going to have to replace the floor. The only disappointment about this bed is how severely rusted the top of the bed sides are. I mean, that's about as bad as pitting ever gets before it completely rusts through. So I guess what I'm saying is I think I can make one good bed out of these two now. So I'll remove this bed completely, and this bed will be the one that we're going to go with. It even came with those side panels that you almost never see, that I think are supposed to go behind and in front of the rear fenders. There is a company out there that's making brand new beds for these old trucks. You get it in a kit and you put it together and weld it up yourself. But I think they're asking like $5,000 for those. So I would hate to spend that much money on the bed for this truck. But anyway, I got this bed for 450 bucks. And I just think that's a smoking good price. It could have been double or maybe even triple that amount, and I still think it would have been a good idea to buy this. So we're gonna wrap this video up now. I know it went a little longer than most of mine do, but I did not want to break this video up into 2 or 3 different parts with the fender. I wanted to show you guys the entire process from beginning to end. If you're interested in these kind of videos, you want to see the completion of this truck, make sure you subscribe because we got a long way to go. Don't forget, 20% off in the store, antiquecarsandstuff.com, until December 31st of 2025. So I'm going to say so long for now. I hope to see everybody on the next video. I'm going to fire this truck up right now and let it run for a while, get it up to operating temperature, because, you know, we had this motor rebuilt recently, and I don't want it to just sit around all winter not running at all. So I like to start it periodically and keep it lubed up and keep it happy for the springtime.